Welcome everyone to Capsule's Think and Link Brand New World, which is really for us a goal of sharing ideas and inspiring change and really sparking a bit of creativity. I am excited to have our special guest here today, Ravi Hampole, the Senior Vice President of Global Brand Creative for Lululemon, and Kate Ancketill, the founder and CEO of consumer brand futurist house GDR. And I'm going to turn it over to them in a moment to introduce themselves. But we're also very excited to have our special guest co-host with us, James Damian, thought leader, design thinker, creative strategist, the list goes on, and previously a speaker on the Think and Link stage. So James, we'll turn it over to you in a moment as well to introduce yourself and give a little background. But just thrilled to have both of our speakers here today. Have a lot of content we are excited to cover. I wish we had 2 hours to do that. But we have several topics we're going to cover in the next 55 minutes. A couple of quick housekeeping items for our audience members today. We do encourage you to include any questions that you have for our speakers in the chat. And we will have this video recorded and the session available on the Capsule YouTube channel after the fact. So look forward to sharing that with the broader audience we have out in the universe. But without further ado, I'm going to jump in and turn it over to James. James, if you could give a little background, your journey, what brought you here today, and then we'll turn it over to Kate and Ravi. James.
Thanks, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm honored to try and fill in for Aaron Keller today as a co-host. My background has always been in design, from my early days in department stores to specialty boutiques to big box retailing, which led me to be a chairman of a board of a public company. And today I work with CEOs and leaders to help them build and think about a design thinking practice within their organization, because we know that design is good business and design produces economic value. So my role as creative strategist in this realm is a real pleasure for me, and I look forward to many more years of it because it is such an exciting space, and it's like the weather, it's constantly changing.
Great, James. Thank you. Great introduction. And we're excited to have you here on the stage with us today. Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could, please.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Kelly. And yes, thanks for having me. As you may detect from my accent, I'm based in the UK. I'm the CEO and founder of GDR Creative Intelligence, which Kelly mentioned is about business futures, and we consult with some of the biggest consumer brands in the world. My personal role in the company is, now that I've been doing this for 20 odd years, is to kind of bring it all together in kind of keynotes and presentations and workshops and board advisory and that kind of thing, to connect the dots really in what's happening in this sort of outer edges of the visible world, which I personally think is 3 to 5 years. Beyond that, I think it is a bit crystal ball these days, of, you know, innovation, best in class, what should we be planning for and strategizing around for retail brands and experiences.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate. Ravi.
Hi, I'm Ravi Hampole. I am super excited to be here today with all of you. I head up global brand creative for Lululemon. My experience ranges, but really focused in the design area. Started off in agency, moved into more of the big box product companies, CPG, worked at Johnson & Johnson, and then where things changed for me is when I moved to Starwood, and that's when I really understood and started to understand what experience design meant, as well as how experiences can create really lasting effects on your guests and customers. So from there, I moved into tech, and then tech hospitality, which was a really interesting combination, especially when it came down to looking at how the experience economy was really sort of expanding, and then now into Lululemon, where, you know, as I've told the panelists here as well, that we call our customers guests. So it is really looking at the experience of Lululemon from a physical and digital standpoint, and I oversee all the creative within that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ravi. Again, excited to have you here, and Capsule as a brand strategy research and design firm here in Minneapolis. We, across verticals, very interested to talk about the future of retail. I'm certainly here today, a variety of topics, how the synergies between the physical and the digital and the virtual, how they combine. So I want to jump right in if we can. James, I know you have a question we had spoken with Ravi and Kate about previously, but would love to get into this meaty topic. So if you could kick us off, we'll jump right in.
With pleasure. This first question is for both of you, and it follows this line. In the past, physical stores led the way and technology was the support. Today, our life starts with our devices and informs and guides us to physical spaces that we choose and prefer. Share with us your views on this change and what brands are doing to unite the physical and digital experience in this brand new world. Kate, let's start with you.
Thanks, James. Well, I think this is a very interesting one. I've been saying for a while that it feels to me like you're kind of hitting the trend on the nose if there is some element of, when you step into a store, it's as if you're wearing a digital jacket of that store. So you're experiencing the real thing, but you're also experiencing a second layer of it through your, you know, smartphone, obviously your device. And I think, you know, we've got the obvious examples of that we all know, you know, things like, you know, scan to ship for large items that you might find in Sam's Club, you know, the obvious, make it easier to find out information by scanning this QR code and watching the videos and the peer videos, and, you know, paying for something and perhaps unlocking the clip on it that is the security tag, and then you can just walk out. All of those are the sort of housekeeping things which are, you know, really important, and absolutely everybody's got to get there. I know everyone's on a journey with that. But I think, you know, the likes of Nike Plus have obviously done a great job in creating that digital jacket where perhaps you're recognized by the store as you walk in. It says hello and mentions your name. Perhaps you can go and touch your phone to a kiosk that's a vending machine that gives you a freebie once a fortnight as a thank you for being a loyal, you know, member of their club. And then all the other things like, oh, you know, I don't actually want to talk to an associate today. I just want to assess your inventory myself, or order something in a different color or size, or I don't want to take it home. I just want it sent home. Perhaps I want it sent home via Uber, for example, and arrive there in 2 hours, as we see with the fast store for electronic goods in Brazil. So I think, you know, these are at the point where most big chain brands are getting it right, to a large degree, I think, in terms of recognizing that intersection between the phone and the products in the store, and the access to the inventory, and the accessibility to things like curbside pickup later on, or booking changing rooms and all those kinds of things. But I think where it's going is probably well represented by the Burberry store, for example, in China, which, you know, incorporates this idea of social currency. So it's sort of moving up the Maslow hierarchy, if you like, away from those, make it easy, make it fun, get more information, get it to you home quickly. And it's more about, how can we enhance your personal status as a well-to-do human being with good taste, whereby, you know, everything you scan online, which is on WhatsApp, obviously, in China, and then you scan anything in the physical store, all adds to your social currency, which is also loyalty points. But then those loyalty points don't result in a bog off, they result in something rather more status enhancing, like invitations to private events or access to, you know, sought after reservations in the restaurant and that sort of thing.
That's fantastic. Wow. And I love how Kate makes everything sound better too, like bug off. It just sounds better. It sounds more pleasant. Thank you for sharing that perspective. This is great. Ravi, I know we've had some conversations about Lululemon, what they're doing specifically, physical, digital, how marrying. Would love your thoughts too, please.
Yeah, no, I think it's, and you know, Kate, I think there's so many things that even Lululemon's doing, but I would, for myself, I just go back to even my reason for being at Lululemon, which is from the hospitality business. And so this is what's really become interesting for me. And part of the reason why I was hired there was because of my background in service design, as well as the experiential nature of hotels. And so, you know, as we're looking at the retail space and then the digital space, it is truly about what, when I was at Starwood 8 years ago, maybe longer, which is sounding terrible, but it was about personalization. And that was really what we were trying to push. And SPG was all about personalization, right? So, you know, the invention of the SPG app, the ability to open the door with your watch, with your phone, and the space being able to recognize that you were there. And so, you know, as I moved into hospitality tech, same type of thing. It's like, what are the main services that people need that really feel like something's personalized? And you're going between that digital and physical space. Can I be in my room, just use my phone, use my watch to order services? The key thing, though, I think with all of it, and I think to Kate's point too, is that the technologies are all fine and those things do drive to convenience. However, the brand piece is the thing that wins. And I think, especially as we're moving into China, and we notice that there are a lot of fast turn companies that are probably using factories that we use to make the same types of materials and same types of products. The brand piece is really what's going to hold us together. And what I mean by that is, what's the actual experience? And so for us, Lululemon, it's community. Community has always been a driver for the brand. It's been built from a grassroots standpoint, and it's been built from a local standpoint. So how do you actually move that into these spaces where if I'm in LA, I'm getting LA product? Also from a digital standpoint, those things are shared, and our educators and our local stores are where these things start to marry up. So personalization, being able to understand the guest where they are, not just purely what anyone would need, but what they actually need, I think is where those things are moving together. And as we're looking at Mirror and that acquisition, that gives us another channel, another touch point to start introducing some other parts of the brand.
That's fantastic. Great perspectives. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump into it's a little bit of a shift here with regard to culture. And Ravi, you just alluded to it to a degree with regard to building community and the pillars of what Lululemon and the brand and what's critical there in terms of how you elevate the brand publicly. But I'd like to, through the lens of, talk about culture through the lens of within your organizations. You know, we all know that culture is defined and cultivated differently across organizations, but it really seems to be such an important defining component of building unique teams. So I'm curious if you could both share your perspectives with regard to the culture within your organizations and how you're maintaining it with people, you know, both inside and outside of the physical office environment. So this is more around employees, not your customers and consumers. So Kate, I want to start with you. Curious, as the founder and CEO of your organization, how are you maintaining?
I think, you know, I'll be quick because I think Ravi has a much more difficult job than I do, coming from he comes from obviously a large corporation, and it's much more complex job. I mean, for us, because we're tiny, we're boutique, we're independent, we're eccentric, we're very flat hierarchy. I mean, you can only afford to do all that if you are, you know, small and independent. So we have that utter luxury of, you know, being able to just choose people based on their utter brilliance, to be honest. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm being rather immodest for my own organization, but it's not me, it's the team are so, you know, they're super clever, they're super hoovery type people. They just hoover up information and sort of squish it all together and come up with some amazing insight. We do have a rule kind of in the company that no one's allowed to say anything at all publicly anyway that is stating the bleeding obvious is what we call it. So everything we come up with has to be going a step beyond the bleeding obvious or anything your mum already knows or that somebody read in the major press that morning. So they know that, and they know that therefore that gives them license and freedom to be a bit odd, be a bit quirky, approach something from an unusual angle, and perhaps say things that are a bit controversial. That's perfectly kind of allowed within our culture. But as I say, it's just super easy when you're as small as we are.
Okay, thank you. That's great. It's great perspective. And yes, Ravi, I would imagine it's a little more difficult in a, or maybe not. I'm curious to hear.
No, it is. It's super complex. It's you know, I've now been here at Lululemon over a year and 3 months, and I always tell people, not like I'm counting, but it's a year and 3 months. And I think the amazing thing here is the culture and what's been created. I think the tough thing here is the culture and what's been created, because you know, as a grassroots company, when you're building bottoms up, you know, right, that's feeding to the top. So that means that everyone is empowered. So when you're empowered, which is a fantastic thing, don't get me wrong, that means your listening powers have to be incredible. And so, you know, as our teams are moving through the new business opportunities, new innovations, new ideas that we're trying to get out in the market, you've got to take into account both the internal workings of the team from a corporate standpoint, as well as our educators out in the field. And so you're spanning the two cultures really, but trying to make them one. And both of them are bottoms up. And so the wonderful thing about it is that everyone has a voice. The hard thing about it is, when do you actually move away from that to actually get certain things done? And I think this is where we are as a company when you're trying to scale at this rate. There are some things that you just need to go and make some decisions on and make some choices, and having an organization that ends up being very flat and everyone's seen as an entrepreneur, it becomes difficult, and it becomes challenging for people to feel like they're being accepted within the culture. So those are a lot of the conversations that we're having today, as well as when we open up, you know, job opportunities, we take it from the full gamut.
Sure.
And it's fantastic in that way. But what I've also learned is that, like I said, the listening powers are really important. I've had to really take a step back and understand, hey, I've come from a bunch of places where hierarchy rules. And it's pretty much, you know, you're bringing the paperwork to the king, and the king is gonna, yes, you can move forward. Right. This is not like that. So you have to come back at it. And we literally hold listening sessions just to hear.
Yeah.
No participate. Like, I'm not going to say anything about what you're saying, but I'm going to take it in. And these are hour-long sessions where it's educators, it's people on the floor, people in factories that come in, and we just listen. And that's super important to us. And we do act upon it too. So there are things that will come up in terms of diversity, inclusion. Our numbers aren't necessarily all the best there, and we're trying to change those things pretty dramatically. So listening is really critical. Understanding where people are coming from, and also understanding how that is going to affect the business, so everyone feels like they're part of the same motion. And that is absolutely critical. It's nothing that I've experienced before. And I do think it makes for a much better experience when people are on the ground, because they're invested, right? So when you walk in to a meeting, just as another example, we'll start with, anything that's bothering people, right? So we call it clearings, but that's really the idea that if there's a problem with the meeting, or is there something someone's distracted by that day, they can bring it out. Like, I'm having a bad day, I'm not totally here. Great, clear it. It could also just be, I have a hard stop at 4:30. So you can do either of those things. And then also sometimes we'll do like a little meditation breathing session. It just gets everyone in the right space. And those things are carried through at the store level too. So participation is really critical. Listening is really critical. And I think that's what makes Lululemon culture really incredible. And I think it translates out to the people that come to the stores.
I would imagine, yes. I would say that, yes, you're living behind the scenes internally what is portrayed through the brand externally. It seems as though, right, you're walking the walk. It's not just something that you purport.
Yeah. I mean, I literally joined because of the idea of well-being, and the idea that well-being could be actually in the workplace. And I've never experienced before. I was like, I've gotten to the age where I'm like, oh my God, I really need to think about this. Like, and I wish more companies, but I know I really do. But I'm the person that would stay up till 2, 3 in the morning answering emails, and I'd be in the organization that would answer back. And so, really understanding that there is, I don't want to say balance, because I think that's an overused term, and I don't think there ever is balance. But I do think there is self-care, which then allows you to show up for other people. And I think that's what is really a major part of Lululemon's culture. And we're trying to impart that on others as well. So, yeah.
Wow, that's great. That's very powerful. Yes. Thank you, Ravi.
Yeah.
If I may, I love the distinguishing perspectives from both Kate and Ravi on this. I do agree that the bigger the organization, the harder it is, and that in big organizations, there are competing cultures. And we as leaders must be aware of that, especially people in the design practice, to facilitate how we work together, which is my definition of culture. How well we work together embodies the values, the principles, and the philosophy of the organization. And that's why those things, everything must start with understanding culture. And Ravi, I think, these listening sessions really talk to the first phase of design thinking, which is empathy, standing in the shoes of others, asking about their pain points, what's on their mind, and going to the people that usually are the quiet ones, because there's an awful lot in there that you've got to bring out. And I'll close with this. Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I mean, I'll just weigh in really quickly. I think that is unbelievable how important it is. And actually, we go through a lot of training on inclusivity. So when we're in a meeting, and especially in the Zoom culture, it's even worse. So, you'll get in there, and there are lots of people that decide to not go on mute. And that's actually become one of those things that is a sign for us that we're going to have a conversation, because when you're not going on mute, you're not respecting others. And also the idea to ask those that are quiet. And I've even seen this experience as a leader at Lululemon. Part of my job is to ask those that are not participating, because they might not feel comfortable. They might just be quiet, but the things that come out are impressive. And for me, in the last even couple campaign ideas that we've thrown together, things have shifted dramatically because we found perspectives that we just weren't hearing or weren't paying attention to, because there are some people that like to hog the mic. And so, it's really important from a, diversity inclusion standpoint that, one, we have the right voices. And we know as Lululemon, we don't have the most diverse organization. It's something that we're extremely aware of, and we're working really hard to do, as well as looking at how we're going to place ourselves from a retail standpoint in the communities that are really underserved, and try and shift the brand from that standpoint. So again, I think the culture piece is so important to us, because it then defines like what's our strategy outside of our doors.
That's critical. Wow, I love hearing that. Just, you think it would be intuitive for organizations to think that way, but it's not. So thank you, Ravi. Thanks for sharing. James, I know you had a question for Kate specifically around the talking a little bit about the flagship model. Could you start there? Because I think there's a lot we could address there, and I'd love to hear from both Kate and Ravi around this idea. So let's hear your question, James. You had a great question for Kate around this.
Well, it really hits home when I heard Kate talk about the resurgence and emphasis on flagship. It really strikes a chord with me, because that's where I started, in flagship models in department stores and specialty stores on Fifth Avenue. So my question is, in your talks, you've identified the flagship model as an important concept for brand expression and experience-based retail. You have also stated in your research that younger generations see the need for physical spaces and places to shop. That's encouraging. Can you share examples of companies that do this well? Also, please discuss how these models can serve the needs of the near me emphasis that has been birthed through COVID.
Yeah, the near me kind of comes to mind because I moderated a conversation with Google, having opened their flagship store in New York recently, and Lego. And Google were interesting, saying that they revealed some of their internal research, saying that in the early parts of COVID, there was a massive just upswing in general internet search for e-commerce purposes. But in the later kind of phases of lockdown, it was a much higher, in fact, took over. The amount of searches for general internet was for near me retail and products that you could buy near me. And so I think that is very encouraging, because we all learned to love our local environs, didn't we, during lockdown? We've all gotten much more interested in our local shops, and that's a fantastic thing. And in many cases, they're the ones that sustained us when others were perhaps, too crowded, or there were long queues, or you couldn't get home deliveries, etc. So I think, going back to flagships, we put together a little video, which I think our listeners and watchers can access after the event. And that's a little 90 or 70-second video with 5 or 6 flagships, which have really impressed us in the last year. And I think what's interesting about them is they're not shops. They hardly ever call themselves stores or shops. They call themselves museum environments, or beauty schools, or gathering spaces, or just anything other than a shop, but they are the places where culture happens and communities gather. And one of them I know was the KDDI telecoms store, for example, in Tokyo. And there were 2 floors, I think, for retail, or 1 floor for actual retail and 2 floors for museum, which was about teaching people what the future world of 5G will allow them to achieve with technology. And they did this currently, obviously it will change all the time like a museum does, by allowing you to integrate yourself with the art, the digital art that's on the wall. So you create the art, it's mobile, it moves around, it becomes part of you, you become part of it. These are spaces that quite often are the kind of places you would pay to get into. They're that experiential. And Lego had an interesting perspective with their new flagship store in New York as well. I mean, they don't make a big deal of the fact that they have a 20-minute brick lab experience, which you do have to pay to reserve that space for your little kind of family unit. But you're not, for them, it's not about paying for the time that you're in there, where you've got digital activities fusing with in real world activities, and then the 2 come back together. It's all very, very well done. But for them, the fact that you're paying for it means that you get to take away a memento that you've created that's unique to your experience. And that was interesting from their perspective, that one of the big things about flagships for them was taking away a memento, having it be a unique experience, creating memories. So the idea of flagship as memory making factory, which I really liked. And some of the other examples that we covered were and I'm terrible at my pronunciation, the Shongshu, apologies to anyone who speaks Chinese, is the bookstore. So if you look at the video, and the last bit of that video is a chain of bookstores in China, which is the most gobsmacking physical retail space I've ever seen. Each one is totally different, but each one is unbelievable. I mean, indescribably amazing. And you can see from the video, every single person in these stores, every single one is holding up their own camera to take a selfie video to show their friends what this is, what this space is. They've never seen anything like it. So I think, if you're creating something which you want to share with the people who are not with you because it's so amazing, then you've done something right in creating a true flagship experience, which is about human gathering, museum-esque learning, curatorial expertise, making something unique. So the Freitag we had in that little video, which is the courier bag people, their new store in Zurich is a sort of mini factory where you can partially finish off your own items. It's unique in the first place anyway, but then you'll make it even more unique with a little bit of in situ manufacturing. So you can't do that online. A flagship has got to provide the things that you can't do online, which is, all to do with meeting people and, serendipity of exploring things that you weren't expecting, that the algorithm had not created for you. I mean, don't forget, we're all going through these narrower and narrower channels online where, the algorithm gets to know us and only shows us things that we've shown interest in before, or they've digital twinned us, and therefore, people like you like this. But what about if we went to a physical store and it changes every 6 weeks, like neighborhood goods, and it's only showing you direct to consumer type products which you can't otherwise get your hands on. These are the reasons why people want to go to flagship stores now. They're visceral, they're community based, they're about uniqueness, personalization, mementos. They're everything that used to be the town square and the Wednesday or the Saturday market, effectively.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love that.
Brilliant. If I may have a follow-up to
Yeah,
that.
please, David, yes.
Um, we have seen flagship models come and go over time. And it's usually because the financial officers in the company don't understand the return on invested capital in terms of creating memories with their clients, that there is real economic value in memorable experiences. So the follow-up is talking about flagship and what I consider to be the interdependency of local near me. They have to work together in order to sustain the pragmatic approaches of finance, that we have to make a breakthrough to show that there's greater economic value. So I would offer this follow-up to both you and to Ravi. Perhaps we should start with Ravi on that.
So we have, there are about, I think, 14 in the pipeline experiential stores. We have a new one coming up in Houston. And there is a true belief that if we are going to position ourselves as a well-being company, that one, we have to go with where our roots were, where, you know, when you look at Lululemon from its early beginnings, events, you know, in 2019, for example, I think there were 4,000 events that Lululemon had put on. And so, you know, those are stemming from marathons, yoga classes, you name it, and they're all localized. And so what is really interesting about that as well, and I'll put another thing in there too, is that, you know, we don't choose like ambassadors from a, you know, Michael Jordan, Kobe, you know, status, right? They are local, they are in practice, and you see yourself in them. So that aspect of the brand is really critical. And we could go further and just go, yeah, I'll sign up, you know, the next great NBA star, dress them in Lululemon, and, you know, now I'm doing wild top of funnel campaigns, and that's just not how it's been working for Lululemon, and it takes away from our DNA. And so these experiential stores that we have are really trying to make it a grander sort of experience that more people can get in touch with and actually get impact at scale. And so that's the major thing, right? Because you can do all these things, but what you want is major impact and news at scale so that people can then go to more localized like stores. So that's the strategy there. And that's where the idea of pragmatism and story come together, right? Because I think the other thing for us that we're challenging and where the experiential stores help is that we are a brand known, and I'll put it this way, and it's not news, is that it's a rich white woman's leggings brand. And we need to shift that. Nothing against white women, but it's basically, you know, this is where we're sitting. And so we need to shift that narrative. So some of these experiences and things start to help make it a much more inclusive brand. It starts to get that story out there in a way that more people can access it too. So when we look at the experiential stores, it is, I think, Kate, you mentioned it, a place to gather. So we have Fuel Space, which is, you know, a food restaurant. We have the studios, which are also a major part of the experience where you can try and buy. And then now with integration of Mirror, we're looking at how their ambassadors might move into the studio portion of it as well. And then even looking at the way that the structure of the space is working. So, you know, most of the time we've been afraid to put studios on the bottom floor. because you want people to come in and buy something. But now we're rethinking that so that it actually becomes more about the studio and the fuel. And, you know, then you're going upstairs potentially to buy something. So that's some of the flipping and the learnings that we've had, is that, you know, you've got to make it visible. You've got to connect with people. We want people to really understand our story and the ambassadors. And actually, more so than anything, now as we're scaling, we want people to not see us as that brand that's the athleisure, purely athleisure, where I'm going to go get my you know, matcha latte in my leggings. But I actually want you, and you could do that too, which is great. But we want people to understand that it's performance wear, and that it is made for running, it is made for training, it is made for yoga. And in order to do that, you have to utilize these experiential stores so people understand what the fabric actually does, other than see it on someone and go, those look really cute, and I'd like to have a pair myself.
Love that.
So that's the strategy there that helps us with the sell-through.
Kate, you have the last word on this question.
I think on the sort of literal aspect of near me, we see things like Zara's store mode in their app, where you can just go to the store mode and then it will only show you items that are available live right now in the size that you want in the store that's nearest to you. And then of course you can get access to it very quickly through Click Collect or whatever. So I think that visibility of the local inventory that is near you, because you may want to go and collect, is increasingly important, and I think in many cases has been underserved. And the other aspect of this is the localization of the inventory in the first place, which has obviously been masterminded, I think, possibly in the earliest phases by the likes of Alibaba, because obviously they have visibility of what everyone's doing online, and therefore they can tell from the online searches, in this 5-kilometer, you know, location, we will predominantly stock X or stock more of X in this particular store, so that there is that kind of, you know, matching to that micro local kind of set of interests. And of course Nike do this well. Each of their Nike flagship stores, particularly in China, is oriented to the fact that, you know, Shenzhen might be a predominantly running kind of place, and Shanghai might be a predominantly yoga kind of place, and therefore they optimize the inventory in each store accordingly. So I think, and also the stores themselves recognizing, and obviously keep going back to Nike, but obviously they do this very well, is recognizing that the store sits within an ecosystem of its city or town, and is part of all of the activities, sporting and otherwise cultural, that it can connect you to as a portal to that local city. And that's why they're sort of so good at creating that rich culture through that app, because it's not just about buying stuff. It's not just about meeting your friends in an experiential space. It's also about providing that portal to, oh, you're a runner. Did you know that there's a running club meeting just around the corner every Tuesday night? Oh, did you know that the stadium is open to new members to come and have a look every Thursday? You know, all of those kind of cultural artifacts are made available to the members of those clubs. And that only really comes with a flagship mentality, I suspect.
That's great.
Thank you so
Kate
much.
and Ravi. Yes, that's fantastic. Gosh, we could keep going on and on about that one. That's a rabbit hole for sure, but a very important one to discuss with regard to retail and the future of. I'm going to shift gears really quickly and talk a little bit about design and creating and building that unique value. You're both, as we've heard even today, vocal advocates about the critical role of design thinking, design methodologies, creating those memorable experiences and content. And especially, I think we can say, when the vast majority of entry barriers to the market are down, at least historically, I'm curious if you could both share your thoughts around, one, do you think that in light of the pandemic, barriers to entry in the marketplace are still down? And this is for emerging brands, right? Riding the coattails of legacy brands. And then what impact do you think that has on the role that designers and innovators play in driving success within their organization? So again, creating that unique value and extraordinary content. Ravi, can we start with you? And then Kate, would love your thoughts.
I mean, this is the, as we're again looking at other markets where the speed at which people are moving into market with product is unbelievable. And, I've said probably time and time again in other forums, even like, we don't necessarily look at competitors from that standpoint, that we have been seeing like share being taken away by the likes of things like Gymshark or brands like that, where it's fast to market. And this is where I think we lean heavily. And I think, as I stated earlier, for China right now, we're realizing that gathering the right insights on who our customer is in that market, rather than making an assumption based on where we are in North America, is really critical, because the brand and the story there is the clincher, and how you tell the story. So for us, design in terms of being able to storytell and like create a really massive foothold in who we are as a brand and holding fast to it. This is why we've spent the last year, and it has taken a year. I mentioned all the culture things, right? To get the brand architecture to a place where we do feel like it's going to resonate globally, and that we have a lot of stories and content to tell, so that the design can like pull off of that. Because otherwise it's clothes on a rack. And yes, if you start to look at things like, oh, this will feel the same, so then what am I actually buying into? And I think that's where the storytelling is really critical. So we're sharpening that story, we're sharpening our positioning around well-being, and then we're also sharpening that storytelling within the store so that people understand the difference. So ambassadors are really critical, performance and storytelling around the clothing. So like our product innovation is extremely critical, and the why. So, we'll see a footwear launch coming up from us this year that will move into that competitors, and moves against their sort of technology play into one that makes sense for us. But that's why it's really important that positioning is just rock solid. So that we can design stories that resonate.
That's great storytelling. I want to touch on the Feel campaign in a minute, because there's a lot there with the positioning. So thank you, Ravi. Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think storytelling is the key word, Ravi. I totally agree that, and I think the barriers are still, nothing's ever easy, but I'd say the barriers are still relatively down, because consumers have shifted their behaviors to more online activity. Most D2Cs obviously are online first, and mobile driven. And the opportunities that are available through e-commerce on the live stream, e-commerce through social media has all absolutely exploded as a result of the pandemic. And so you could say the barriers are even lower, because many of those channels are inexpensive, shall we say, for brands to access, especially if they are using peer-to-peer recommendation and marketing. I know it can be expensive to use well-known influencers, but we all know that it's micro influencers who are actually the most influential in terms of many brands' strategies these days. So those days, as Ravi said, of kind of paying the huge star, the big expensive celebrity star to promote your brand, that doesn't necessarily feel like the future to me. It feels more like live streaming, alt e-commerce, social commerce, the e-commerce that comes within gaming communities, actually, I think is a huge area of opportunity. Having your brand find some way to be present within the metaverse, I think is important going forward.
James is a wanted guy. Someone's really trying to get a hold of you.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm turning it off.
It's okay.
I should have done that. My fault.
We're in your living room, James. It's totally fine. No, Kate, thank you. That's great. And the metaverse, a whole nother, we talked a little bit about that. James, I don't want to steal the thunder because I know you have some great questions too, but perhaps we could find some time to talk a little bit about the metaverse and what brands are and how they're showing up there. But James, you have a question you want to follow up with?
Regarding metaverse?
Metaverse or any other topic. We've got several we'd like to try and cover in these last 10 minutes, but one that's of interest to you. Well,
I'm very curious for the audience to really hear more about metaverse. Mm-hmm. Those two pillars, I've listened to Kate's talks on the NRF, and metaverse is very important to her. I know that. And I think the audience should get a better understanding from both of you on what the metaverse means to our future.
Shall I go first?
Yes,
yeah, definitely you.
Well, if you talk to people who run companies that typically are designing virtual apparel and accessories for avatars, then of course they are going to be the sort of people that say, this is absolutely the future and this is going to revolutionize all retail. But they would, wouldn't they? And it may well not turn out to be the case. But you do have to sort of give them, I think, some degree of credit in that, in some instances, the virtual versions of, say, a Gucci bag are selling for more money in the virtual world on the metaverse than they are in the real world. Obviously with non-fungible tokens, which makes them both authentically acquired and also sellable in the future. So I don't think we've ever really had a blockchain backed sort of metaverse world before, and because people say, well, Second Life didn't turn into anything big, did it? And it was kind of boring having that sort of virtual world that was quite hard to navigate. You had to be a bit of a geek to get around it. And in truth, you've got to have some quite high-tech equipment with fast speeds in order to really navigate, say, Decentraland, etc. But having said all that, so it's not all absolutely here. This is the future, I would suggest, as in it's a possible future. But my view is that those provocateurs from companies like Unmateriality, or let me get this right, RTFKT, who design product for virtual meta beings or avatars, I do think we probably shouldn't be discounting what they're saying, because some of them are saying we now are moving towards a world where there are 3 channels. There's physical retail, there's e-commerce, and then there's the metaverse. And if you start to think about, well, some people are starting to work for wages in the metaverse. Say on Decentraland, they're paying people to be real human hosts within the casino and to be croupier to welcome customers in. So you think, hang on a sec, that never happened before, that's new. As well as, you might be buying sneakers for your avatar that are unique, and then you might have them made up in the real world and both have a non-fungible token, and therefore they potentially retain their value. They're both saleable. They're both, traceable through the blockchain as being authentic. None of this was possible before either. And so there is a huge and burgeoning desire and demand, I think, from Gen Z in particular, 90% of whom are gamers, to clothe and, you know, accessorize their online personas to achieve the same kind of status that we all as human beings seek on one level or the other in the real world. So you know, it's interesting that people like Coke are now creating branded apparel for auctioning, for charitable purposes, etc. You know, all the big brands are dipping a toe. We see the likes of Burger King having Burger Town in Call of Duty, the big game, but they then have you know, that restaurant in the real world. And if you buy items from the menu in the real world that are branded to Call of Duty, that can generate you know, credits for you to use in game. So it's super interesting already, the kind of practical, commercial, let alone marketing opportunities that are already being grabbed by brands. And from my personal experience, obviously not giving anything away, but on our consulting side, all of our clients are expressing interest now in what should they be doing in or on or with the metaverse.
So it's so fascinating. And Kate, you had mentioned something, I think, in a previous conversation, some of these events that are happening in the metaverse worlds, which is inspiring to hear that brands are using this as a force for good. So it's outside of just commercialization of a brand. It's actually interacting and engaging with humanity in a way that can be perceived as a positive, inspiring event. I don't know if you have any context to add there, but I thought that was interesting.
My favorite case study of the last few months is an example of Journalists Without Borders. The obviously journalist organization have set up a virtual library on Minecraft, which I personally don't play, but I know is a huge, great big multiplayer game. And, you know, you can sort of fly over it. It looks like a massive building, obviously a virtual building. But inside this virtual building are tens of thousands of files, videos, articles, books, films that have been censored. It's called the Uncensored Library. And journalists, if they were to make these available in their own countries, would be basically thrown in jail. But this is a free and open global resource for all journalists everywhere to, you know, share truth and freedom. So that is an amazing and inspiring example, I think, of how, in this case, maybe not a traditional commercial brand, but a, you know, a force for good entity for the journalists have, you know, may potentially change the world by doing that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate, for sharing. Ravi, any thought, the metaverse? Any thoughts there? And because we talked a little about technology and AR, VR and haptics clothing, like how your Lululemon's moving into that space, and not that that's necessarily metaverse, but just how is technology not in a physical environment, how is Lululemon as a brand engaging with their customers in a way that, you know, just the future of building those connections? Anything you want to share there?
I mean, first thing I'll say is that my son is obsessed with Minecraft, and
Right.
I think he could spend an entire day with his friends, and somehow it's incredible. Just like they create their world and they're in it forever. So the future is sitting right in front of me, basically, and it has to be accepted. You know, I think we're just dipping toes into it, to be honest. It's you know, we're trying to get to a place where the physical and the digital can come together, and haven't gotten to the pure digital yet. And I think that's definitely something that we're looking at. You know, when we look at even imagery and marketing, you know, we are very cognizant of where people are moving towards and how they're consuming content. So for us, even just little things that we're trying to do, and I think the Gucci shoes were just banging, like, my God. super cool. And so, even as we're just introducing shoes, we're looking at even just the virtual try on. So I think we'll start dipping our toes into like, what does that look like? How does it feel? And then maybe later on, how does that translate into something potentially like a Gucci shoe experience where it's purely a digital piece? Other things, as you mentioned, looking at haptics and then how do you connect both the physical and digital, but we aren't there yet in terms of getting to a place where it's fully digital. I think Mirror is an opportunity for us to look at that space and look at how community translates into a digital world. So as we look at haptics, connected weights, etc., those things are connecting the two. But I do see, and we see an opportunity in that space, and with Mirror as the first foray into it, of how that might potentially evolve.
Yep, absolutely. It's fascinating.
Oh yeah.
We used to be scared of that, or like this feeling sensations in your clothing, but this is the way of the future. I mean, it's how are we engaging physically, digitally, and meeting our customers where they are.
Yeah, I think it's, for us, like over the pandemic, it was really interesting because the sense of touch was missing.
Yeah.
And so as we started to look at that from a R&D perspective, it's like, how can you reintroduce that without actually having to touch? And that was, one of the problems that sort of came up. And one is the touch between, two that are related. The other is like touch between, an ambassador and, someone that's doing a workout. So can you actually like help guide, etc. But that was definitely something that came up, and I don't think it's going to go away. Right. As we're looking at things. So it's definitely, there's some time being spent on things like that.
Fascinating. Thank you both. Hey, James, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Anything else as our experienced design resident expert, anything we can talk about there or we want to close with? Any thoughts you have or questions you have for our speakers?
I would like to ask about what advice would you offer CEOs in retail about using the values of their company to embrace the unknown? I find that a lot of CEOs, you mentioned it, are still uncomfortable with these new spaces. I think designers and consultants have a role to play in showcasing the importance of the human experience. What advice would you give CEOs? Because I think that's where the obstacles live within organizations. Not all, I hate to generalize, but I found that to be the case along my journey. Can you share some of that with the audience?
Kate, you want to start?
Anybody can join in.
Well, if you're talking about CEOs of large organizations, then I would suggest that they study very carefully what D2Cs, digitally integrated D2C brands are doing, because they tend to be at the forefront of understanding empathically their customer and cutting out all the unnecessaries of perhaps the way that legacy businesses have done business. Now, I know it's easy for them because they are, they've got oodles of money often from VCs and they've only got one product and it's all very simple. But because it's all very simple, they tend to do it very well, very single-mindedly, and their method of communication cuts through very often. So I think we could all learn a lot from the best of the fast-growing new D2Cs. And I would also suggest that, I'm afraid, China is indicative of the future of retail for the West, and we should be looking at what they're doing very closely as well. Obviously, we need to be careful in not everything is transferable. We have different laws and rules and culture, and we cannot and should not take everything that they do. But the way that they are changing customer service and experience is unbelievable, and just we can't ignore that. So those two things I would suggest those CEOs study very closely.
Fantastic advice. Ravi?
You know, if there's anywhere that we're leaning right now, I think one is China, is that the ecosystems that exist there in terms of purchase, the combination of social media to then purchase is unbelievable. And we're taking a lot of hints ourselves on what that means. You know, the article came out not long ago on TikTok being the new mall. And I'm like, that's old news, to be honest. I feel like, yeah, it is, but go to China and it's like, it's like the old mall maybe. And so I think, you know, the way that the interactions work there, the way that they're interacting with each other, with their brands is way more integrated than we are in the West. And so we're taking a lot of notes here. I think the same thing, like everyone should be taking notes on what's happening there. And yeah, the being able to be a little bit more single-minded, streamlined, the things that I learned even from working in the tech industry were wild, because the chances that were being taken to enter markets in new and exciting ways and non-traditional ways were just more accepted. And so, you know, I think gathering the insights is really critical, and design can like help build on those insights to create those really incredible interactions. But China for sure it's on our list. We're sitting here literally looking at all the channels going, oh my Lord, what do we do? So it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, can't ignore what's happening in the East for sure. No, thank you both. Those are great perspectives. James, great question, because I know we wanted to get to the meat of that for sure. And I wish we had more time, because there's so many more things we'd love to touch on. I want to mention, and it's a plug, but it's also because I am a loyal consumer of Lululemon products, and I love what you've done with the repositioning with the Feel campaign, Ravi. So we put that link here in the chat. Want to reference, and if you could quickly just touch on, I mean, this is again about wellness and celebrating being different. If you could just, because I think that's an important thing to share, just for humanity, what brands are doing, like Lululemon.
We have a innovation platform that's around feel. When we design our products, it starts with feel states. So if you're in running, you want to feel faster, we start with that feel state as an end benefit and then build the product out from there. So it's a very different type of approach. That idea that if you feel your best, you perform your best, is what we carry through to a greater idea of true well-being for all. And so, you know, we define true as the both physical, mental, and social well-being. When all of these things are together, you have true well-being in a Lululemon sense. So this campaign is really starting to talk about, one, the feel states that ladder up to a better sense of well-being and wellness, which I think the world right now is filled with fads and trends that don't actually give you true well-being. And it's something that we also feel like we can deliver on. So when people live the sweat life, a greater sense of a growth mindset with our ambassadors, and then what encompasses that is a greater sense of community and connection, we believe everyone rises and you have a greater sense of well-being. So this campaign is really introducing that. There's a male protagonist, which is new for us, to help our acquisition there, but I don't think you're going to find too many male-based ads where the guy is crying at the end. And so it's when he finally goes through the transformation of fads of well-being to truly well-being, which is through feeling, that there's a breakdown moment. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at, that feeling is your way through to well-being.
Great example. Beautiful example of storytelling. No, thank you, Ravi,
Thank you
for sharing. Kate, any final thoughts before we close out?
No, just that I think overall it is a time for huge optimism. I think we are coming through the other side, and there is, I think, a growing consensus that what we all need is, you know, flagship stores on the one hand, but not so many of them. Obviously, the larger and more experiential, probably surrounded by the much bigger pyramid of regular main street stores, which are small, curated, supported by the endless aisle, and all of those innovations that we have seen, of course, in delivery, and that connection between, you know, the store and your mobile phone, and, you know, the smaller store becoming that support system essentially to e-commerce, I think is a point of acceptance that is developing, from my perspective anyway. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, and it will shake out to be a better world for the consumer.
Wonderful.
From your lips to God's ears.
Thank you, Kate. This has been a fantastic conversation, Ravi, Kate. Thank you, James, thanks for joining me as co-host today. Love your thoughts as well, as always. And thank you to our audience for joining. We look forward to seeing you in the future. And we'll have this video out shortly on the YouTube channel. So if you did miss it, this is the way to view these inspiring perspectives. So thank you all for joining, and take care.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Kelly.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.